Good day to you. Have you seen this meme going around on social media before? Have you seen that guy with a coffee mug? At the bottom it says, "Change my mind." This meme says, "Rap mashups are a junk food of mashups." I bet you've seen him, right? I bet you've seen him actually with the same format, but a different message. And still at the bottom, it's saying, "Prove me wrong," or "Argue with me," or in that particular case, it's got a message asking the person to debate him with his coffee mug. You've seen that, right? Isn't it interesting how something like that, which was created by a conservative activist who's set up this meme photo outside a Christian university in Texas, that whole format has been borrowed and put all over the internet with all kinds of other messages, other than the original one there, if that was the original one, about rap mashups. It's a kind of group behavior that takes place on media where people join in. People join in with hashtags. People join in with likes. People join in with comments. People join in with sharing. People join in with doctoring a meme and putting in their own ideas into the meme, joining in with what is really a sociological phenomenon. It's a phenomenon where people behave a certain way because they are in a group, whether they're online or whether they are in person. And that's what sociology is concerned with. Sociology studies people's behavior in groups. It's a very, very closely related discipline to the discipline of communication. And in today's class, which is all about sociological analysis, taking on Chapter 11, you will see a lot of similarities in the language that the discipline of sociology uses to analyze media, because it's concerned a lot with symbols, right? And symbols we've talked about under a rhetorical analysis. So here we are beginning our final third of the course, I'm just going to briefly pause here to say if anybody has any questions on your paper, please schedule with Marina, the department secretary, at mcameron@esu.edu. That email address is also on the webpage, and I'll be glad to talk you through your paper and any ideas that you may have. I want to see everybody do well. The paper is due the Saturday after this coming Saturday. So 2 Saturdays from now, if you want to think of it that way, you've got a whole week after the last chapter is taken on in this class, and the discussion posts get graded, the discussion questions get graded, and the summaries are graded. You've got a whole week there to work on your paper. So let's get back into our topic for today, which is all about people behaving in groups, and we're going to take on what is known as sociological theory. Sociological theory, which is based very much on another conceptual theory that's smaller, that is expressing sociological theory. This smaller conceptual theory is called symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism, it comes from the sociologist George Herbert Mead, an American sociologist. And what he's saying with this smaller conceptual theory of symbolic interactionism is that the character and conduct of people's social interactions, the character and the conduct, think about that as how people behave. It's what people think is right or wrong, how they express their opinions, how they act morally, how they act ethically. That's all part of this. The character and the conduct of people's social interactions when they talk with each other are shaped by symbolic meanings. Those interactions are shaped by symbolic meanings that these same people assign to objects and events and people. It's the meanings that these same people who are interacting are assigning to objects and events and people. An object could be a car. If you see somebody drive a car and it pulls up to you and the person driving it really throttles it and it's got a very loud muffler and is definitely, making the whole neighborhood know that this car is coming down the street, that's an object. But it is also an event. That sound is creating an event. It involves people in the car, people who hear the noise, people who live in the houses, people who are driving in cars in front of that car. It's an event. How is it interpreted? Well, we're going to find a lot of variety there. Some people will see that as rude. Other people will see it as funny. Some people will see it as an expression of a muscle engine, and lots of other interpretations as well. So George Herbert Mead He's really looking at when people get together and interact with each other, their conduct and their character is going to be shaped by the meanings that they are assigning to objects and events and people. And that makes this subject, sociological analysis, an extension of our last class, which was on reception analysis, because we're really focusing on people now and where meaning comes from as being derived within people. That's what we're focusing on. So people, in other words, according to a sociological analysis, people act in accordance with their interpretation of the world. They act in accordance with their interpretation of the world. I don't know if you're like this, but if I have a bottle cap from a beer and I'm walking past a trash can that's open, or actually it's a recycling can, and I throw that bottle cap and I miss, I want to make it like a basketball shot, but if I miss, I cannot keep walking. It's like my conscience says, you cannot leave that bottle cap. You've got to go back and get it and put it in that bin so it makes sure that it gets recycled. I'm not holding myself up to be some kind of, pure as a driven snow person. I'm just giving an example of how people do act in accordance with their interpretation of the world. And my interpretation of the world is it is very important to recycle. And I do not like to see things get thrown away and go into a landfill. And I know there's a landfill that's in Pen Argyl, which is just a few miles from Stroudsburg. It stinks up the whole town with all this trash buried in there. That's part of the way that I see the world. You have your own way of seeing the world. We're going to talk now about two key terms that George Herbert Mead uses in developing his symbolic interactionism, which in turn develops sociological theory as a whole. His two key terms are agency and structure. Agency and structure. So agency is recognizing that human beings have the capacity to act purposefully. Human beings have that capacity. They are not necessarily controlled by external forces. They are not necessarily acting without any forethought or reason. That actually human beings, to give a big nod to them, if you want to think of it that way, as opposed to throwing shade on human beings, humans have the capacity to act purposefully. They are the deciders, right? Humans decide what they're going to do. When you go out into the world each day, you're deciding which path you're going to take, which road you're going to take. You're deciding when you're going to walk into a classroom. You're deciding when you're going to go to the bathroom. You're deciding when you're going to text somebody back. Those are purposeful decisions, and that's all part of agency, one of the key terms of sociological analysis. Next up is structure. Structure. There's a word that came out through Marxism. We studied the superstructure and the base, right? So structure in sociological theory, in symbolic interactionism, structure is any social force that constrains your agency. Any social force that constrains your agency or anybody else's agency. Hey, I know that you would like to drive faster than the speed limit. I did last night, coming home from Philadelphia. I caught myself. I was really tired after an 11-hour train ride all the way from Charleston, South Carolina to Philadelphia, and then I had the 2-hour drive home and caught myself speeding a couple times, but I backed off. I backed off because I know I might see that red and blue in my rearview mirror, and then I got a problem. I got a problem with a speeding ticket, or maybe the rental vehicle I had didn't have the proper documentation, and I'd have to deal with that. So it's a social force. It backed me off. And you have the same thing with your media habits. When you jump on your social media, you're probably thinking a lot of things that you would really like to post, but you don't. You don't because you know you're going to get somebody mad, somebody's going to be upset at you, somebody you care about is going to raise a fuss, will be misinterpreted, etc., etc. So you do hold back because of the social forces present there. All right, now let's move on to the next contributor to sociological theory. The next contributor to sociological theory is Erving Goffman. Erving Goffman, he wrote a book with a famous title called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. The presentation of self. Isn't that an interesting idea? It's like you're not just walking out into the world, that when you're out in the world, you're on stage and you're deciding what side of you you're going to present. You are like an actor. In fact, his whole conceptual perspective is called dramaturgy. Dramaturgy, like borrowing the term from theater. It's about drama, but not necessarily the drama that you think of with people fighting and arguing. Like, it's not a Kardashian kind of drama, although it could be. All right, so What this perspective essentially says from Erving Goffman's point of view is that we do care about how others perceive us. We do. Otherwise, we wouldn't make sure that our hair is blow-dried or our clothes match when they happen to fit nicely but maybe don't match. We worry about things like that. We care about how people perceive us. If our phone is cracked, to get into some media examples, we feel like we have to apologize. Yeah, no, my phone's in bad shape. We care how others think about us, and therefore we engage in what Goffman calls impression management. Impression management, managing how we come across to others. And it is an art. It's an art of successfully staging a character in a way. You may not want to think of it like that because it may be questioning your sincerity. That's not what we're doing here. We're saying that you play many, many roles in life. And you're trying to do that because you want to manage your impression. Now, I can tell you students sure act differently when they come into my office in the Monroe building than when I see them at Philly's Pub on Main Street or the Warrior Bar and Grill. They're acting very different then. Or at a Warrior basketball game. They're acting very, very different there as well. Or in their natural setting, if I were to walk past a residence hall or an apartment, acting very different there as well. Which is to say that people are managing their impressions, right? So specifically, Goffman says that we can look at four dramatic elements when we're analyzing media. We can look at four dramatic elements. We've got the stage. The stage is the performer's degree of publicness. The performer's degree of publicness. Remember, they're purposeful. They're in charge. They decide what they make public. And again, the realm of social media provides a really fertile area to take a look at this particular dimension in this class. And just think about all the stuff that your friends and followers and whatever you're going to call them that you're connected with, networked with on your social media platforms. Just think about all the stuff they share. The stuff they share about their sexuality, their relationships, their locations, who they are friends with even. That's a basic premise of social media. You can see who others are, quote, friends with. That's a basic premise of networking on social media. Think about all the stuff that people share, and then you know plenty of people who don't share anything on social media, right? So they have a very different approach to what they consider to be their stage. That is the degree of publicness that they make available on social media. Next up as a dramatic element is the setting. The setting is the situation in which the performance is occurring. What is the context? Is there a history? I have people on Facebook, my main social media platform, who are constantly trying to provoke other people with their politics. They want to get a response to Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whatever. They want that. And so when I see an argument flare up, I see it as just one of many. And I see the feelings that others may see as being hurt as just being, it looks like it's part of an argument that both sides expect to have as a kind of ritual. And the only way that I can see that is because of the setting, by looking at the context. Next up as a dramatic element is the part. And that is the pattern of the actions that define the character being performed. It's the pattern of the actions that define the character being performed. Is the person in question who is putting their behavior on display, do they have a reputation as a neutral party? Do they have a reputation as a person who takes sides? Do they have a reputation as a person who gossips? Do they have a reputation as a person who's unreliable? I don't know why I can't say that sentence. These are all examples of themes, character traits, if you want to think of it that way. Now let's go on to the fourth dramatic element, and that is the team. That is the team, and that is the cast of players, right? Just like a play has a cast, a lead character, etc., supporting characters. That's how Goffman's approach sees our interactions with each other in groups. That we have teams that we surround ourselves with. Is your team your family? Is your team the people who live on the same wing as your residence hall? Is your team the people who share interests in gaming on social media? Is your team the people you work with? Who is your team? Who are the people you regularly hang around with? That's all part of dramaturgy. All right, next up, we're going to take a look at frame analysis. Frame analysis, also from the work of Erving Goffman, extending the work of Irving Goffman, his book called Frame Analysis, 1974. And this is very relevant, especially to visual or video media, because frame analysis basically looks at how media frame, notice how I'm using that term in the plural, media frame, not media frames, media frame our world. I mean, what you're seeing right now on my camera is framed, right? It's framed rectangularly in terms of the aspect ratio. You're not seeing what's over here. You're not seeing what's over here or up here or down here because I've got the frame set up very specifically. So that's kind of what this is talking about, but it's really much more than that because framing and frames themselves are social constructs that organize our experience. They are social constructs that organize our experience. They work through the way that we select stimuli, the stimuli that we emphasize around us, and the presentation of those stimuli to us. And this may seem vague, but if we conceptualize this process of framing things as going through selection, emphasis, and presentation, think about the nightly network news on television from a big city like Philadelphia. From a big city. What do you think the top story on a Channel 6 action news from Philadelphia on television is going to be? I bet you're going to say a gunshot or a fire or a murder, something along those lines. And you would probably be right. Philadelphia is already on pace to have another record year of gun-related killings. And so that would seem to be a normal thing. But at the same time, how is the city's budget? Do you know? At the same time, what about the Philadelphia 76ers and how well they're doing? At the same time, what about the rejuvenation of Penn's Landing? Have you been down to Penn's Landing in Philadelphia? These are all good things, right? But what happens is the news start to frame our perceptions of Philadelphia by leading stories that have murder or scary crime dimensions to them. And so the framing takes place not just within what is shown, but also that the story that's selected to be the first story, supposedly the most important story, is not on Penn's Landing. It is not on the budget in Philadelphia being balanced. It's not on any of those things. It's how it's being framed. And that means that an editor, a director, a reporter, a freelancer, somebody working for ABC Action News is making the decision. Let's go cover this as our story. And then when we cover the story, we're going to interview police. We're not going to interview corrections officers in prisons. That's a choice, right? So that's selection. That's what frame analysis looks at. When you look at media content, you're looking at how is it being framed, not just by what you're seeing or what you're hearing, which again, sound bites, it's picking and choosing what you're going to play for the audience as a journalist. It is also about the people you talk to. It's about how they're portrayed. Even a camera angle can invite you to think about a person. If I was in my video and I was like this, you would think a whole lot of different things about me. You would think I was, a slouch or not knowing how to use video. I'm not saying I do know how to use video, but the angle of a camera can play a big role in frame analysis. All right, now that takes us to our final thinker in sociological analysis who we're going to talk about. And actually, he's a communication professional. He is Kenneth Burke. I saw him speak at Penn State before he died. He's the most important contemporary rhetorician. That is a person who's studying rhetoric, Kenneth Burke, B-U-R-K-E. His relative, I think it's his nephew, has a farmhouse out here in New Jersey, and my colleague, Jem Zeytinoglu, Dr. Jem Zeytinoglu, Dr. Z, as most students call him, organized a conference incorporating Kenneth Burke and memories of Kenneth Burke and his ideas into the conference, including a visit to that farmhouse. So we're talking about a person who's very, very, very well known in the communication field and lived until recently, lived a long and productive life and had a big impact on the field. And he has this idea that he calls equipment for living. And what he's saying about that is that media provide individuals with symbolic resources for resolving everyday anxieties that we have. The media are out there for us to overcome feelings that we have that we're having anxiety about. Isn't that an interesting idea that now we're really getting into human beings with Kenneth Burke and his equipment for living? We're using media for living. It's equipment. It's not like a gadget. It's not a gizmo. It's actually like medical equipment that we're using for a living. And he says that what's going on is there's a hierarchy of values that we are impressed upon, that are impressed upon us, I should say, a hierarchy of values by society. So for example, if you had a person in your car who had a medical emergency, let's say that they broke their leg and they're in the car, would you suspend the structured behavior that you have of driving the speed limit at 55 if you thought that person's leg was causing them so much pain that you really needed to get to the hospital faster, if you could, so you would go faster, right? So there's a hierarchy of values, and in this case, the value of taking pain away from the person in your car is more important than following the law of 55 or 65 or whatever the speed limit is. So that's what happens. We have a hierarchy of values, and a lot of times we experience guilt because these values conflict with each other. Like, what if you're in love with somebody who you just don't think your family would accept, or members of your family would not accept? What do? You've got a conflict there, and Kenneth Burke says that results in guilt. We feel bad about stuff that we've done. And that's where media come in. Media are going to address guilt, Kenneth Burke says, as equipment for living, because nobody wants to feel guilt. But it is a human emotion that is so regularly felt. I don't know if I can say that everybody feels guilt, but it sure seems like that. So guilt plays a role in religions. A lot of religions actually use guilt as well, but it's not only within the confines of religion. So Kenneth Burke says that we deal with guilt through three processes when we use media. Three processes. One process is transcendence. Transcendence is where we resolve guilt by appealing to a new hierarchy. It's where we resolve guilt by appealing to a new hierarchy. Let's say that you sat down for an evening in front of the big screen TV, and you had every intention of doing the dishes and reading for your classes, but you just ended up watching Netflix all night. Okay, so then you wake up the next day and you're feeling guilty, and so what happens is you say, you know what? I actually used Netflix for some badly needed downtime, and when I think about it, I had a great night's sleep last night, so it must have made me really tired. So you're resolving your guilt. You're going through a process of transcendence in explaining your media use there. That's how Kenneth Burke says we deal with guilt in one particular way. A second way that Burke says we deal with guilt is through mortification. Mortification, it's got that M-O-R-T root in it, right, which means death. So this is where we deal with guilt by a confession or a self-sacrifice. It's a confession or a self-sacrifice. So we're in a way killing a secret. That's where that mortification, that death connection comes from. Or we're killing a behavior, where we're giving up a self-sacrifice. A self-sacrifice is when you say to a person, a professor maybe the next day, they say, you don't have the assignment this morning, you're supposed to do the assignment, and you say to them, you know, last night I really needed to take some downtime, so I just watched Netflix. I don't know what happened. I missed the assignment due date. I'm sorry. That's a kind of a confession. And by the way, it's an honest confession as well. It's going to depend on the professor. But what's happening there is a person is dealing with that guilt by confessing the truth, and also self-sacrificing. If a student makes a comment like, I know that I may not get credit for the assignment, they're self-sacrificing. And in a way, they're indicating they're going to suspend that behavior. So mortification is a powerful tool for overcoming guilt as well. And then finally, we have victimage. Kenneth Burke says victimage is when we scapegoat or transfer guilt to another party. We scapegoat or transfer guilt to another party. I see a lot of talk going on social media right now about gasoline prices, right? A lot of people are focusing on gasoline prices. And you have people that are saying, oh, no, the reason for the high gasoline prices is because of X, Y, and Z happened in the Trump administration. And plenty of people who are saying just the opposite, that no, it's because of X, Y, Z that happened in the Biden administration. So how could that be dealing with guilt? It could be about dealing with the vote that you cast and having regret. It could be about the car that you drive and not regretting not selling it and getting an electric vehicle, or getting a vehicle that doesn't use so much gas, or just driving it less and walking more. It could be guilt about that. And so what we do is we transfer that. I don't want it on me. here, you take it, right? We put it over there on somebody else, and that's why it's called victimage, because they really didn't have anything to do with it. They didn't even see it coming, right? You just put it on top of them. That's victimage. And Burke says that we use media to deal with guilt as well. So media in the Kenneth Burkean model are necessary in our lives. They're like utilities. They are equipment for how we deal with none other than life itself. This then will wrap up our sociological analysis. Have a great day.